Hi guys, this is Jonathan Lambert with the Mathematics Development and Support Service at the National College of Ireland. And in this short video we're going to consider an example of where we need to calculate or construct the converse, the inverse and the contrapositive of a particular implication. And once again, this is a short video in our series of videos dealing with propositional logic. So let me give you an example. Okay, so if I have something like this, okay, let's say my implication. Okay, so I have let's say if A is less than B, okay, if A is less than B and B is less than C, okay, well then A is less than C, okay. So this is a logical argument here, okay, and we've seen this, I'm sure, many times before, this concept of transitivity, okay. If A is less than B and B is less than C, then A is less than C. So this is my original implication. So here's my implication, okay. Don't forget, we have the if, we have the then, which demarcates our premise. So this is my premise, okay, or our hypothesis. So my premise from my conclusion, okay. And what I'd like to construct is, I'd like to construct the converse of this argument, the inverse of the argument, and also the contrapositive of the argument. So don't forget, let's just recap that if we have a premise, P implies Q, okay. Its converse is Q implies P. Its inverse is P, not P implies not Q. Okay? And its contrapositive is not Q implies not P. Okay? So here's the implication. Okay? Here's the converse. Here's the inverse. And here's the contrapositive, let's say. Okay? So let's just keep these in mind here, okay. So here's an argument: if A is less than B and B is less than C, well then A is less than C. So the converse of this argument is where we flip the conclusion and the premise. We flip the premise with the conclusion. So the converse, okay, is going to be, if A is less than C, well then A is less than B and B is less than C. Okay. That is just this is now the converse argument. Now these are not logically equivalent to each other. Let's keep that in mind. Okay. The inverse argument, the inverse, is where we negate the premise and we negate the conclusion in situ, where they are. So the original argument is, if A is less than B and B is less than C, well then A is less than C. That's the original argument. So the inverse is where we negate the premise, we negate the conclusion. So negate the premise. So I'm just going to put a bar over this from a propositional logical perspective. That means it's negated. And negate the conclusion. Okay? That makes sense. Now, what's important here is this, is that, and we've seen this earlier on in relation to propositional logic, we defined what's known as De Morgan's law. Okay? De Morgan's law says that P ANDed with Q bar is equivalent to P bar or Q bar. So actually what we can do here is we can break the bar and flip the ands to ors. So this becomes, if A is less than B is not true, not A is less than B, or this becomes B is less than C bar, then we have A is less than C bar. Okay? So you see what's actually after happening here is that this negation of the premise, okay, although there was a connecting two parts of it together, we broke the bar, we applied the Morgan's law, yeah, which allowed us to break the bar and flip the ands to ors. Okay? Now, what does it mean? If A is not less than B, what does that mean? Well, then that means that A must be greater than or equal to B. So what we have is, if A is greater than or equal to B, or if B is greater than or equal to C, because that's what it means for not B less than C, well then we must have, in this case, A is greater than or equal to C. Okay? And this here now is known as the inverse argument. Okay? Let's do the contrapositive. Okay? So looking at the contrapositive. So our original argument was, if A is less than B and if B is less than C, well then we have A is less than C. That was our original argument. So remember that the contrapositive, okay, the contrapositive requires that we flip the premise and the conclusion, and that we negate both. Okay, so we need to flip them and negate them. Okay, so let's do that. So the contrapositive, okay, is going to be, we flip them, so if A is less than C, well then we have A is less than B and B is less than C. And it has to be negated, so we need to negate them. And once again we're going to have de Morgan's laws, so this becomes if A is less than C bar, well then we have A is less than B bar, or B is less than C bar. Well, what does that say? That says if A is bigger than or equal to C, well then either A is bigger than or equal to B, or B is bigger than or equal to C. Okay? And actually from a logical perspective, what we're saying is that this argument here now, the contrapositive argument, this argument here, this is now our contrapositive of our original statement. Okay? That this argument here is logically equivalent to the original argument, because what we have is, and we've proven that in our previous video, is that an implication is logically equivalent to its converse. So that this argument is the same as this. So if the original argument is if A is less than B and B is less than C, well then A is less than C. And that's transitivity. We know that's the law of transitivity. Okay? Well then a logical equivalent argument would be if A is bigger than or equal to C, well then what we must have is either A is bigger than or equal to B, or B is bigger than or equal to C. And then also what we have is this, is in relation to the converse. The converse was straightforward. The converse is where we just flip the premise and the conclusion. If this is the case here, well then this is logically equivalent to its inverse. Okay, so these two arguments here are exact same, but from a different angle, let's say. Okay. Okay guys, once again this was Jonathan Lambert with the Mathematics Development and Support Service at the National College of Ireland, and this short video, which was an example of how we can construct the converse, the inverse and the contrapositive in a concrete scenario, okay, or more importantly how we can construct the converse, inverse, contrapositive of an implication given a concrete situation. Okay, I hope that this video was in some way intuitive, and more importantly I hope that was helpful, and thank you for watching.